Welcome to Reviewing Curatorial Practice.
Not yet. Sorry. Go.
Welcome to Reviewing Curatorial Practice. This is the fourth talk in our series of CINE Talks. My name is Anna Vermeeren and I'm the project manager of CINE, a 3-year digital heritage project. And I work for Museum Nord in Northern Norway, who's the lead partner of the project. Today, I will be your host and moderator. I hope that you, specifically tuned into Facebook Live, will ask lots of questions and engage in our conversation that we're having here on Zoom. And you can do this by writing in the comment section on the side. We will then pick up your comments and questions and feed them in. In our project, we have partners from 2 different sectors. One from the innovation sector, both universities and multimedia companies, and also from the heritage sector, mainly museums and cultural institutions. And this interdisciplinary mix has enabled us to have many interesting discussions. What is possible with technologies and what do the museums actually need in terms of technologies, but also what do our audiences expect and need. And then after these discussions, more than halfway through the project, Corona came, and with this seemingly a relatively natural shift into digital. Therefore, I think it's again time to review curatorial practices. We see that our CINE projects with the toolkits and guidelines that we have developed has actually a lot to offer, and especially to small museums who are more than ever interested in using digital technologies to present their content. But what does it really mean to go online and to put things there? Is that enough? Or do we need to really do things differently? My colleague once said to me, imagine if we took lots of things from our collection and put them into our museum, just in a big pile in the middle of the room. What would people see who come to our museum? And sometimes I think that we find some examples of this online. This happens when stories are placed in snippets with little content around. This happens also when objects are uploaded without a narration or some context that brings them alive. And sometimes that's fine. Then they are part of a collection and they stand by themselves for what they are. But maybe if we want to interact better with our audiences, we need to employ different strategies. And that's what really this session is about. We are asking questions today. How can digital technologies aid or help us to extend our curatorial practices? How can the use of technology better engage audiences with a particular view with playing a more active role in communities? And how can curators of heritage become more adaptable and maybe creative and confident in the digital realm? So I would now like to give the floor to our speakers. We have 3 presentations today. And after that, we will take questions and have a discussion. I would like to, first of all, introduce Abira Hussain to present the archive and the community. Abira is an associate producer at All Change and a PhD candidate at the University College of London, specializing in Somali heritage, digital archives, migration, and health. And in recent years, she has worked with the British Museum, the Refugee Council Archive, and the Somali Week Festival, among others, to deliver many projects and workshops engaging with the Somali community. Abira, it's really nice that you can join us today from London, and I would like to hand over to you. You're muted.
I'm sorry, rookie mistake. I'll just share my screen now and begin my presentation. Sorry, have I shared it correctly?
Yes, that's fine, but we can't see the slide yet.
Can you
No.
see it now?
Yes.
I almost left the meeting. Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Anna and Joe, for inviting me to present today. I wanted to speak a little bit about the Nomad project, which touches on some of the points that Anna made, which was about exploring the connections between archives and community, thinking about the hybridity of technology that can allow both physical and online collections to meet. And so this is what I'll be exploring today. And so I'll initially be speaking about the Nomad project, which was a project that began in October 2018. And what I was really interested in was exploring how digital tools can help us to reimagine a museum that acknowledges its past and builds a reparative future. And so often for me, being both a visitor of museums and someone from the Somali community, where there were collections of the collections from my heritage within museums, I often felt that museums often told a story of Western civilization, a high status version of Britain's imperial past, pervasive and invisible to those who are living in a place where they feel they belong, where all the structures supporting the idea of their reality exist, but often the story of who I am does not exist there. And what is presented when it is there is at odds with mine, an othering experience. And I was reflecting a lot on W.E. Du Bois' work, where he speaks about the double consciousness and the experience of engaging with physical and online collections where you are the subject and often not the intended audience, and what impact that has. However, there has in the last few years been a desired shift in museum practice, one that looks towards to engaging with its past and exploring how digital can widen access, participation, and the type of stories that get told. These stories need to be told, I believe, by us, by the communities which the museums hold the collections of. And I think digital can help to challenge practices that continue to erase and misrepresent our history. And storytelling is a big component to the project, which is looking to challenge the idea of authenticity and who gets to tell the stories and how those stories are told. Often the discipline of anthropology and ethnography, I found often excluded more ephemeral, more embodied knowledge. And so the project was looking to see what digital could do to bring those together. And so in 2018, with the support of National Lottery Heritage Funding and Cade Somali Arts, I co-founded the Nomad project with Nemesine. So this was a collaborative project centered on workshops engaging Somali communities and exploring the creative use of immersive and mixed reality and web-based technology to contextualize archival Somali objects with the people and the traditions to which they belong. And so this project was inspired by an exhibition I worked on as a community curator with the British Museum, which was called Somali Object Journeys. And so the exhibition was called Objects of Survival, the Beauty of Somali Craftwork. And this also led to the 3D digitization of 4 objects, 3 of which you can see on the screen here. The British Museum, like other museums, relationship with Somalia began with the colonial encounter during the 19th and 20th century. And this led to its current collection of just over 2,300 objects, some of which were acquired through military and anthropological expeditions. This encounter is described by Mary Louise Pratt as a contact zone between colonial powers and the communities under their rule. The interactions are often underlined by racial inequality, conflict, and coercion. And despite independence, that legacy continues to impact the ways we engage with these cultural institutions. James Clifford, in the book Museum as Contact Zone, which was inspired by the work of Mary Louise Pratt, speaks about this contact, which continues to reflect radically asymmetrical relations of power that are seen in the ways museums engage with diaspora communities, which are reflected in how our records are displayed physically and online through a European lens. It does not value or recognize the individual creators, its purpose, and its role, within those communities. And so I was interested in not only the content, but also how these contexts were physically catalogued, displayed, as well as then how that online database was structured, and how that created, as I mentioned earlier, this issue of othering. These online collections, as I mentioned, weren't intended for the use of other communities to engage with. A lot of this work is spoken by Melissa Adler, who looks at taxonomic reparations and thinks about how can we think about organizing metadata as well as content online in a way that reflects how communities experience their heritage. And so the white cube is opposed, I felt, to the ways that I experience and enact my heritage. I remain tethered to my culture through stories, songs, poetry, and dance, and embodied knowledge that is neither visible or recognized in museums. I was interested in how the digitization of archives and objects could create mobile digital assets that would allow me to engage with them in ways a museum could not. If we place these in a games engine, could we create a world where I could be seen? And so the use of immersive technology could bring together my lived knowledge and the disparate collection of Somali objects and archives that are scattered across institutions. I wanted to explore the affordances of this technology and if it could be a reparative space that acknowledges the object's past, its dislocation from Somalia, its migration to the UK, and my encounter as a Somali diaspora, trying to understand what it means to have a living connection to this cultural heritage held in museums. This was an image that we started with, an image of a Somali child herding goats through the British Library. It came from the notion of breaking free of glass cases. We wanted to use mixed reality, which is akin to augmented reality, to place heritage objects in real life spaces, exploring ways to present Somali cultural heritage in a way that more closely represented their intended use as nomadic objects to be used. Because the objects were virtual, they were freed from the inertness of a museum display to travel from place to place nomadically and engage with audiences outside of the museum space. So this led to the development of the mixed reality piece. We used motion capture to create life-size characters, digitized objects from the British Museum, and archival sounds from the British Library's John Lowe collection. It was experienced through a Microsoft HoloLens headset. You see what's around you, but with a virtual overlay, a tension between your reality and ours. Through an air tapping motion, you can select either a gourd, a woven basket, or a headrest that floats down, where you then see a Somali character using the objects with sounds and songs that might have been heard as the objects were being used. So I'll show you a short video of the mixed reality experience.
Nomadic Somali people walk great distances, never staying in one place for too long. With each move, they take all their belongings with them, their animals, their possessions, even their homes. Imagine you had to carry all your belongings with you. What would you take? We would like to invite you to spend some time with a nomadic family, to see the objects and hear the songs which are part of their everyday lives. To find out more about these and other Somali objects, please visit nomad-project.co.uk.
And so this experience was toured within workshops during Somali Week Festival in London. We partnered with a number of Somali community organizations, inviting older women to engage with the Nomad Project, where it would spark stories and songs. And we also invited the Somali community to bring their own heritage objects, which were digitized in 2D and 3D, and to share memories about their objects, which are uploaded online in an archive available under a Creative Commons license. And so we had an on-site digitization station using kind of lo-fi portable photogrammetry set up for delivering high quality results. And we were overwhelmed actually with the number of objects that came. But also part of the experience was about, was also been to enable people to digitize their own content. We were really interested in recognizing there's a challenge and a slight disconnection between the people that are involved in this project and the objects and the people that have a living connection to these objects. So I was always interested in this idea of trying to increase, create a level of digital literacy around these technical skills and allow people to have an understanding of the process behind these experiences. And so moving forward, our goal is to kind of continue with this aspect. We also, as I mentioned, create an online archive. And so these records can be viewed on a universal viewer. And I was really interested in the use of an open source platform. And the website hosted is on GitHub. And so this was an important aspect. Within the archive, we don't distinguish between museum objects and community objects. The ambition was to be able to combine the sounds we have gathered through oral histories, archival sounds, and stories with the objects. And so often with digital projects, particularly ones that are led by communities, their assets are more susceptible to loss. Many community digital projects are often either become inaccessible or disappear from the internet if they're online. The Digital Preservation Coalition describes digital community archives as critically endangered because they do not have the resources or the technical knowledge to survive. So we often face a double erasure. What little is available online often disappears. So I wanted to explore a method that would allow us to not only record our own story digitally in a sustainable way, but maintain control of our material. This was really trying to think about the power dynamics with museum projects. We're often led by large academic institutions and museums where there are large-scale digitization, and potentially there are connections with communities, but often the communities are consulted sporadically, and there isn't a partnership where they have control of the digital assets, where they have the technical skills to be able to maintain their own digital assets, or whether often they have to partner with institutions that perhaps may not have similar views and to them. So there's often a vulnerability that exists. So this was also thinking about, well, how can we, what resources are there to enable communities to digitize and maintain their digital assets? Can we find a way of building other community organizations together to have this almost in a cooperative way to build an online space where they can digitize and preserve their digital collections, and where the flow of innovation doesn't necessarily come from institutions, but also from communities. The Universal Viewer was an interesting platform because it allows potential use of storytelling, as well as thinking about having multiple medias. And the use of the immersive space was thinking about, well, often databases separate objects from their sounds, photographs, and that digital space could connect these collections, could connect the curator's knowledge as well as the community knowledge. And as I mentioned earlier about this idea of authenticity, what stories get to be told, and what knowledge is considered scientific enough to be evidence of an object's use. And for us, it was actually saying, well, as long as you have a living connection to that object, that story is valid. And so we work with a storyteller to think about how to create stories around these objects. And although the project started off as quite digital, it moved to quite an analog space. Because what we found was working with the communities is that their methods of sharing knowledge were through WhatsApp or through social media. And actually the immersive space, something that was quite separate from their modes of knowledge production. And so it was thinking, well, how can we bring those two together? And so initially this project was about trying to create opportunities for that intergenerational circle around storytelling, where young people who were more adept at technology and older people who understood the objects to realize that no one is making these beautiful rugs or bowls or vessels anymore here within the UK, and that sense of community and the fact that the songs can help you to bring together that knowledge, and that they carry this encoded information. And so this, for us, it was about trying to bring two generations together to tell stories, and then think about this knowledge exchange, and also to help the old generation with the technology, where we explain, well, this is how a smartphone works, this is how you get on the internet, and this is how you engage with these objects. Now tell us what these objects are, so that simple knowledge exchange can occur. And also thinking about, well, being a diaspora community, no longer being in Somalia, the traditional routes or spaces that would have existed that would have enabled us to understand who we are and learn about our heritage don't exist anymore, or relevant, or work in the same way. So how do you understand what it is to be Somali within diaspora, and what spaces or interactions exist that enable you to understand those aspects of yourself? And so that was one aspect. We also developed, realizing that the headsets are expensive and often a solitary experience. We wanted to be able to be accessible, and this led to the creation of postcards using web-based augmented reality. Instead of downloading an app, you enter a URL into your browser, where you can then point your phone's camera at the marker and an object appears with an associated song. And so that was an important aspect to the project as well. So finally, the project Nomad was about developing a process that broadens the parameters of what objects and archives are, and what is considered valuable to collect. It was also using the digital environment to erode those divisions. It's about utilizing this new forming digital tradition to connect oral and intangible traditions with the literary traditions of museums and archives. It was about recording the imagined records of Somali elders and young people to disrupt structures of power, to challenge the omniscience of the curator, so we could harness it to imagine a more liberated and inclusive future. Thank you. Sorry, I realized I might have gone on a bit.
Thank you very much, Abira. That was really fascinating to hear you talk about the Nomad project, and to ask some questions about how we can acknowledge the inequalities of writing history. I also really loved how you approached this in a very creative way. For example, taking the goats into the British Museum, and what you said about breaking free from these glass cases. I think that's a really inspiring way of dealing with these stories that that should be told. So thank you very much. I would now like to lead on to our next speaker, that is Sue Basbegu. She is joining us from Turkey today, and her talk is entitled Thinking Outside the White Cube. Sue is an arts manager at the British Council in Turkey, and she created the online exhibition project Museum Without Walls in 2016. And she will be talking to us about this exhibition. Her professional practice focuses on impactful and inclusive international arts projects, and she's passionate about digital innovation and its implications for culture and creative industry. Sue worked with the Bilgi University as a research assistant, Istanbul Museum of Modern Arts as an assistant curator, and Mixer Art Gallery as a consultant, among others. Sue, it's really nice to have you here today, and I would now like to hand over to you.
Thank you, likewise, and thanks for having me. Let me just share my screen. Yeah. So thank you again. For those who are watching us on Facebook Live and are blind or have visual impairment or simply have a bad internet connection, I will describe myself. I'm sitting in front of a white wall. I have short hair, I wear glasses, I also wear a dark red shirt, and I'm in my late 30s. Today I will be talking about how we try to break the white cube with our Museum Without Walls project, and how it affected the curatorial practice of devising an exhibition. So briefly, what is Museum Without Walls all about? It's an accessible digital exhibition platform that we developed to showcase the British Council collection and works from international artists. Since 2017, we started working back in 2016, but launched our first exhibition in 2017. Since then, we launched 4 different exhibitions. The first 2 ones are offline now, they can't be reached, but the last ones, Dancing with Witches and Almost There, are still available online at the link. I can also share it afterwards. I want to talk about the context where we started, why we did Museum Without Walls all those years ago, before the pandemic and before everybody went online with their content. At the British Council in Turkey, we had a successful exhibition of Grayson Perry's work, both in Istanbul and Ankara. Back in 2015-16, we had a good feedback from the audience and the institutions, and the visual art sector in general in Turkey wanted to know more about the British Council collection. And for those who don't know about the British Council collection, it's a huge one. It's been on, the council has been collecting it since the late 30s and now has more than 8,000 works. Those works, a small scratch of those works are available around the globe, either landed to museums, exhibitions, or in some teaching centers, but most of them are in storage and can't be accessed by the audience nor the curators. So we have a huge heritage of British visual art history, and on the other hand, together with the success that we had in Turkey with the exhibition, we wanted to continue and to find new ways to showcase the collection. But then we had a huge economical crisis that is still ongoing in Turkey. Then we had terrorist attacks, and it was physically impossible to bring an exhibition to the country. So we decided to challenge ourselves and go online, but so that we would be able to showcase it in an economical way, and we would be able to reach more audience outside of Istanbul, the cultural capital of Turkey. And we also wanted to create professional opportunities for local curators to go dig in the exhibition, pick out their selection, put it online, and showcase it to the world. Each year we are doing an open call around the theme to choose a curator. The first 3 years we did the open call locally, so we choose curators from Turkey. And the last year we opened it to the region. That is entitled Wide Europe, and it's very specific to the British Council. But we engaged 1 curator from Ukraine, 1 from Georgia, and 1 from Turkey, and they worked in a collaboration and did the Almost There exhibition, which you can still visit online. I think that, thinking about the white box, I need to, describe the main challenges that we had along the way. Those are equal challenges to physical space as well, but they are also very specific to the digital. So we wanted to create an alternative to the white cube area, a space that would, not replace it, but would be an alternative for people who don't have museums in their hometown, who are intimidated by the art. We wanted to create a digital platform that would be accessible by anyone, anywhere, in all means, all definition of the word accessible. And we obviously wanted to present a unique artistic content that won't be available anywhere else. So those 3 major challenges created Museum Without Walls, and they are obviously interconnected, and we can't have Museum Without Walls without dealing with the challenges of any one of those things. I'll now go over small screenshots of what we did each year and how the platform developed over the years. So that was 1 screenshot of the first exhibition that we had back in 2017. You'll see that it's like a 100% replication of the white cube. It was our first year. It was the first for everybody, for the British Council, for the curator, for the design agency that was delivering it. So we decided to go with the way that we know of and how to handle. We all knew how to handle like white cube space or a space, physical space. So putting it online would be more easy for a first step. Our first aim was to try the digital, and then we could move along. And it was also a curatorial choice, obviously. But as you can see, we had sculptures, we had paintings, we have text on the wall, and we even had visitors around it. And it was a literal 3D space that you could visit from your browser. I will come back to the sculpture thing later on. The second tier, our curator Ulia Soleil decided to break down this idea of space, of size. So she proposed a 360 panoramic view of things, of the works that she proposed. It was the theme was around inclusion. She went on to select to do a selection of portraits out of the British Council collection, with quite famous one and quite not really known works of British artists. Here, the idea was to give the experience to the visitor where they would lose the sense of space. So that's like 180 different of what the first exhibition proposed. And we could see works that were, for example, on the top image, the works are smaller. The works in the middle are way smaller than the works on the left. So all this sense of size and space were totally deleted from the user experience. And that was a totally different take on the digital. The third year similarly used a panoramic approach. The theme was women, and our curator Mine Kaplangu did a selection to tackle the myth of witches. And she her and together with the design agency, they also wanted to create this space, this idea, and use all the symbols around the witches theme. So we had the forest, we had the oars, we had the fire, and here the visitor would start and you would be in the center as if you were around the fireplace, and you have 4 rooms around you, each with different titles and sub-themes. One here is the familiars and natures, and then you would go in and you would see the works within the theme. And again, you'll see that it's this infinite linear showcasing approach of the works. Last year, our 3 curators worked around the theme of in between, because it was quite similar. I mean, Georgia, Ukraine had the similar past. Turkey understands what they've been through, and the question around border, the question where the digital breaks the borders, and we are in a digital space and we have our own borders. So they worked around those themes. And as you can see, that's the landing page of the exhibition. So when you go in the exhibition, you see this, and you can see the whole workload here, every works, and you can click on them and go into details. And it's, again, you see the linearity that brings down all the work together. And each and every curator wanted to give the visitor the power to choose where they would want to start. So it's the same in a museum as well, but there's always a proposition for you to go around. But here they all, except the first one, which was like a replication of a museum, but for the last 3 ones, every creator wanted to give this freedom to the visitor to start and go around as they wished. This theme of linearity is a little bit, is not a little bit, it's totally tied to this accessibility and user experience issues that comes with the digital world. It's not about the disability as well, as we mentioned. It's about the ease of accessing the content. So that's why in a physical space, you don't think about accessibility issues. issues would interfere with the layout. The curator would have more freedom to how to present, which color to choose for the wall, or what the framing would be. All those things would be more artistically related rather than accessibility driven. And it's not because that's the right thing to do or that's how we do it in museums, but accessibility is not a priority for museums because most of the museums, at least in Turkey, the old ones are not accessible. Even if the museums are 100% accessible, the cities are not. So it's never a priority for the curators or for the artistic output to be there as accessible. But since we at the British Council, we devised this platform, we set our boundaries, and our main aim was to be accessible in terms of infrastructure. So that means compatibility with screen readers, SEO, and also all the assistive content like sign language, audio description of the work. We present all those things, and we still continue to improve on that side. It's never like you are 100% accessible or you always have your boundaries, but that unfortunately creates, in brackets, but that creates the linearity that sometimes is frustrating for the curator coming to the artistic content. On paper, the responsibilities remain the same for the curator, but since Museum Without Walls is set out to be an accessible digital space, available to anyone, anywhere, free of charge, and with just one click, that changes a little the extent of the responsibilities. It brings its own limits and challenges, obviously. And for example, for work selection, when those are things that we experience along the way and we had to deal along the way as well, both from our side and from the curatorial side. But unfortunately, when there has to be a certain level of self-censorship, but I will explain why. If any social media platform or search engine detects that you showcase nudity, pornography, propaganda, etc., even if it's like the most renowned work of all, I mean, if like imagine, I mean, any work, and then you end up being filtered, and that means that you won't appear in searches, you won't be able to promote your content on any social media channels. So you would need to rely on organic visits. So people that would be really interested in, your exhibition, that would have heard about it like word of mouth, would come and see it. And today in the digital world and after the pandemic, I mean, with so much content online, you would lose most of the audience. So that's why you have to be, unfortunately, more careful about what you put there online if you want to be seen by people. But on the other hand, coming back, for example, to the work that I showed in the first exhibition, the sculpture, this work belongs to Richard Long, and it's a 3 by 3 meter diameter work, and it's made out of stones that he picked out along his way doing his walks. And this work was on the collection archive. I mean, we saw the curator saw its picture, and she wanted to have it because it's story, and I mean, she wanted to have it, but it was deep down in storage. And at the British Council, we don't have the space to take it out and put it in and photograph it. But the curator insisted, and we tried our chance. We contacted Richard Long, who is a well-established British artist, and even quite old as well. And we wrote him a letter, and he was quite interested and said, I don't really understand what you mean by digital, but yeah, let's try it. And we asked our agency to 3D model the work. He had some feedbacks about the visual, and at the end we managed to put the work in the exhibition without actually seeing the actual work. And that's the power of the digital here. I mean, even reflecting back to the first presentation, I mean, that gave us the opportunity to show this work to a wider audience. Otherwise, it would be stored in it's still stored there. And on the second advantage here in terms of work selection, last year we had works from Valery Lamak, who is a deceased Ukrainian artist from the Soviet times, showcased alongside Suki Danda, a very young British artist, showcased alongside a very established artist from Turkey. Those things were made possible thanks to the digital, because it was easy to bring them those together. But otherwise, if we were doing a physical exhibition, then it would be, in terms of budget, in terms of logistics, that would have been so hard to bring those things. So works, yeah, they have the up and cons of the digital world. In terms of that, again, we try to use a more inclusive language that would appeal to general audience, so that we don't lose a first timer to the text, but we want everybody to be able to at least enjoy a couple of works before they log out of the exhibition. And we work with accessibility editors that are working together with our curators, but sometimes that's also quite frustrating for the curator, where they want to express themselves as they want, but we need to, I think the digital needs to, at least Museum Without Walls needs to find the balance between too artistic and too general. And finally, in terms of design, that's where I think, I mean, I mentioned linearity, but I think that's one of the most frustrating, not frustrating, but challenging experience for the curators to change their mindset about being in the digital. The assumption is that on the digital you can do anything. I mean, you would click on something, then it would start talking, then it would start flying around, and the sculpture would come to life, and then you would pass to another one, and it would be interactive, and you could gamify any work, and it would one appeal to everybody and one be accessible by everybody. But it's not. That's the challenge here. I mean, that's why we're linear. You can do all those things. You can use VR as a technology. You can use IR as a technology as well. But then only a handful of people would be able to experience the exhibition. So that's a choice that we as the British Council made at the beginning, that we would be accessible. And that's also a choice, that's also, I think, a statement that we put when we do the open call. And that's a long journey to convince the curator and ourselves in the process. But I think that's also one of the changes and the importance of being online, is being accessible. And by all that, that's my last slide. By all that, what we achieved, when we look back at what we achieved in 4 years, we reached more than 850,000 people. We received many awards, including content, so artistic awards and design awards around the globe. So that was quite nice. And those two things below are the most important for us. One is 5% of exhibition visitors claim it was their first time visiting an exhibition. So coming back to our aim, or why we started doing this, I think in that sense we achieved, then curatorially as well, and for the artists and for the British Council collection, I think it's quite an impactful achievement to be the first of anybody in terms of exhibition visiting. And we managed to showcase more than 60 works that otherwise won't be able to be seen by the audience, alongside 25 international artists. So overall, it's a very challenging process. I mean, to break the white cube, go on the digital, but its achievements are equally rewarding for the curators, the collection of British Council, and the audience, I would say. And thank you.
Thank you, Sue. That was definitely very impressive numbers. That was one of my questions, actually, for you to see how successful you were in audience reach. But numbers are obviously not everything. And I think your talk really nicely showed us and shared your learning about this process, both in terms of conceptual exhibition making, as well as very practical about the logistics and the choices and the accessibility issue that you've brought up quite a lot. For me, it was particularly interesting to see how you moved from a known conceptual format, the white cube, into something much more experimental. So I can see this sort of risk taking from testing it out in something that you know quite well to actually moving into a different realm, which might come back into our discussion later on. So thanks very much. Our last speaker today is Jackie Aitken. She is from Timespan and she's joining us from Scotland today. Her talk is using immersive digital technology to mobilize heritage for social change. Jackie is the digital heritage curator at Timespan in the Highlands of Scotland, and she has a background in archaeology, museums, and immersive technology. Her role at Timespan includes the digital curation of the museum and also the engagement of communities in co-production. And over the last 2 years, she has led the development of a new digital visitor experience and virtual reconstructions of the past. This was part of the CINE project, so Jackie is one of our CINE project partners. Jackie, I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Anna. I'll just share my screen now. Hopefully that will go okay. If you could just...
Yes, we can see your screen.
Oh, lovely. I just start the presentation. Just take a second to load. Hope it comes up. Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Anna. So Timespan is an international cultural organisation in Helmsdale, a historic fishing village in the northeast coast of Sutherland in the north of Scotland, with local, global and planetary ambitions to use culture as a tool for social change. We are a place of art, research, critical heritage, local history, future propositions and action. We believe that cultural organisations are public spaces which belong to society, and as such have a responsibility to shape a brighter new world based on principles of equality, emancipation, sustainability and inclusion. We are a digital innovation leader in the Highlands Museum sector, and we're one of the 9 CINE partners working in collaboration with the University of St Andrews, another of the partners, developing new immersive digital reconstructions that provide an overview of the landholding systems in our case study area, the Strath of Kildonan, at 3 major periods of change and societal disruption. To illustrate this, we focused on an Iron Age agricultural settlement, an early 19th century pre-clearances farming township, and Helmsdale at the height of the Scottish herring fishing trade in 1890. These new immersive digital exhibits are a central part of our current museum redevelopment plans, which will provide accessible, interpretive and disruptive platforms for exploring the area's colonial connections to the transatlantic slave trade and the global impact of climate change. These themes, including land justice linked to reparations, race and land redistribution, are central to our museum vision, and we've written a new heritage manifesto to guide our future work and programming, and you can see some of it on the screen now. It was clear from the outset, doing our digital work on the CINE project, that our digital work was a valuable and effective interpretive tool with the capacity to communicate affecting and critical narratives, and provide us with a unique way of presenting and sharing a wealth of archival and object-based collection information through online digital exhibitions, COVID-safe Oculus Rift headsets, and the touchscreen exhibits, and streaming content to mobile devices through social prescribing trail apps. The first phase of our museum digital transformation has been completed with the launch of our Real Rights online interactive exhibition. The exhibit considers the history of the Highlands through the intersection of colonialism and climate change to investigate land ownership and management and the fishing and leisure industries, to understand how these legacies reverberate in our current projecture. The constellation model of presenting these histories was deliberate and part of our efforts to demodernize the cultural institution. It's hoped that this format will encourage participants to produce their own histories from the tapestry of histories we present. Climate change is already here and will increasingly influence every political and social question, having a huge impact on near future lifestyles. Agriculture and fishing, outdoor and heritage tourism, and energy production, the primary industries which keep Helmsdale and the surrounding district sustainable and functioning, are both subject to threats and contribute significant studies in the field of climate change. And you can see on the screen here a simple GIF graphic showing that by 2500, we'll actually have lost part of the village of Helmsdale, which will have been engulfed by the sea if the climate change threat is to continue as it is. The history of the Highland clearances is overwhelmingly understood, singularly through the lens of victimhood. And Scotland has often allowed its colonial history to be mythologicized. The Highlands has a disproportionate role in exploiting the West Indies, particularly in Guyana. And this colonial history has had significant consequences in the development of Sutherland, but it's not widely known or made public. I'm just moving to our Real Rights online exhibition. Hopefully we'll go through that and it'll just take a second to come on. So I think it's here, we're in it. So this is our exhibition. I'm just opening it up here. Our Real Rights exhibition highlights many of these important issues and presents them through a fusion of archives, objects, digital spaces, and discursive narratives set in a colourful graphics with object motifs from our collection. And I'm just taking you a quick look through the exhibition here so you can see the general layout of it in different sections. To show how effective this platform can be, we'll look at a few examples. If we look at part 2, which is on the screen here, we can see a collection of botanical specimens from Kildonan, presented as illustrated drawings. From left to right, there is an ancient crop of 6-row barley, improved ryegrass, and sphagnum moss, which thrives in peat bog. And if we go to the digital model, the digital space, I'm going to turn down the volume here. And hopefully you can still hear me. So in the digital space, we can further explore these two themes by interacting with different digital spaces, as demonstrated here in the Iron Age model, where we can discuss how past episodes of climate change affected crop production and how the shift in temperature in the Iron Age to slightly colder and wetter conditions favoured peat growth and encroachment on settled farming habitations who migrated to lower latitudes. We can also explore deforestation from the Iron Age to the present and how it contributed to the current climate crisis. And as you can see, going through the model, we've spent quite a lot of time on the development of the vegetation and the landscape itself, so we can actually discuss these important issues. And if we come down to section 4 in our exhibition, so moving on to part 4, we can see a selection of native Guyanese botanical specimens, which exhibit medical properties and were exploited by Western colonialists for pharmaceuticals and profiteering commercial trade. And if we visit this other digital space here, and we can further explore these colonial connections within a Highland context by visiting Helmsdale, the digital space as it looked in 1890, where we can thus discuss the exportation of herring from Scotland and Helmsdale in the early 19th century to feed the slaves on the plantations and the colonial connections with Highland landowners and families all over the north. Real Rights demonstrates how digital heritage can be used as a generative tool which has the potential to democratize cultural production rather than present unilateral narratives. Digital innovation work itself should be based on a rigorous research process, and we spent considerable time identifying useful archaeological and environmental data and critically evaluating source material to ensure we were being as faithful as we could be to the authenticity of the reconstruction. We've produced documents that reference all the sources, and this will allow us and others to reference our digital work. It also provides standard for best practice and other museums to follow. Finally, we have incorporated our digital research and projects with artists, organisations and movements from across the globe to inform how we frame local issues, which moves away from a Eurocentric model of explaining the world. These include Zapatista embroidery collectives and collaborative women's craft network, Palestinian heirloom seed library on the local food production, natural history of Palestine and the role of museum in preserving local natural heritage. We hope that this short presentation actually shown you how our museum is going to feature these important global issues, but how we're also going to use the digital spaces to be relevant and to be important spaces where we can have important discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for this insight. I think you've given us some powerful examples of how you connect the past and the future, but also how you start from a very strong conceptual base with this manifesto, where you then use the manifesto to also link heritage content to and curate that very carefully in a digital realm, like, for example, the Real Rights exhibition. And what I can see here is how you layer content and bring in a comparative manner content together that otherwise would maybe not be so obvious to bring together. And how then the digital can really give us a lot more opportunities and possibilities to do this layering successfully. So thank you very much, Jackie. Thank you to all our speakers today. I would like to lead over to our discussion. I can see that we have one question here from our Facebook audience, and I think this is for Abira. Rebecca Strain would like to know the website where you can find the collection of objects that you have shown. I wonder if you can maybe just briefly let us know and then share a link in the Facebook comments.
Okay, I'll do that now.
That's great, thank you. I would like to start with a question to our panel. Imagine you had a couple of people coming to you from small museums, and they are seeking advice. And they ask the questions, what sort of digital dissemination works really well today? So what is your experience in things that you've done where you feel this is good and this is digital stuff that we can use to present digital content well? Any takers?
I would say it depends on the audience, perhaps, and the content. I wouldn't necessarily start with the technology, but perhaps work with, well, what's the content and who are the people that we're looking to engage with and what digital technology would work best. For my own personal experience, as I mentioned, social media, Instagram, Twitter, particularly for kind of, well, Instagram for young audiences, Twitter for more kind of professional based audiences, and WhatsApp was something that a lot of people, a lot of older women that we engaged with, interacted with. I think there are things like radio, TV, there are things that are more ubiquitous that people are using actually already. I think it's useful to think about what already exists, how are people already using it, and whether that can be used as a vehicle for sharing your content than necessarily creating something entirely new. And so I think that sometimes would be worth exploring. And also my practice is mainly working in a co-creative, co-productive way. And so it would be working with audiences or with a particular community group that I'm interested in engaging and thinking about, well, what is it that you're interested in, and how could we co-create something that is actually useful for you and isn't just about me putting something on a website that no one will look at. So that's.
Can I add to that as well? I mean, I would echo what Abira said. I mean, I think it has two layers. I mean, you should understand your content, what you're offering, and is it quite different from what is online? Because, I mean, every country has, everybody has so many content online, and the problem is that curated content is hard to find. And there are so many similarities around the globe, obviously. So understand your content, then try to do the best research and find similarities around the globe, and maybe partner and try to enter, not to reinvent the wheel, but to use those mediums or those partners, those collaboration to reach an already existing audience. And if there are no audience for what you're offering, ready audience, then try to really understand who you want, understand and define who you want to reach, and ask them how would they want to be reached. That's I think that's the simplest way to, you know, coming up with an idea, and always be simple in messaging and don't start with all the complex website or Instagram account, and don't expect people to start follow you just because you put something online. Lower your expectations, I think, would be an important starting point as well. Then you achieve more when you expect less, obviously.
And I just like to say as well that, I mean, what we've found is that there are three main ways of, you know, engaging with different groups, and how people wish to be engaged with digital technology. So at the moment, especially over the last 6 months with the huge changes that into our lives. So we have how we engage people within the museum space itself. Then we have how we engage with our volunteers, our communities who are at home in their own homes. And we also have amazing landscapes where we are. So how do we use digital technology to allow people to engage with the landscapes, the sites, the histories that are outside as well. So we found certainly as we've developed and certainly developed our exhibitions, we found that these are the main ways that people do want to engage with digital technology, but it has to be relevant to them. So it's a tool to interact with people, but it's also got to be relevant collections and histories and topics and issues as well, as we said in our exhibition. And people, we have at Timespan, we've got a TV channel. So we've developed this idea of having a TV channel. So everything, all the events that we are participating in, the great thing is that a lot of these events are being recorded, so people can come back to afterwards. And I think it's become a really great resource that people have access to this, but it's the way we organize it. I think, you know, we've got to really think about how people normally access information through digital technology. And I kind of like the idea of a TV channel as a way of doing it. In the landscape, I think it's important to have that live experience, to actually experience the outdoors in real time. So by having through an app on your phone to be able to engage in real time with somebody explaining where they are, giving you a tour of a landscape that might be remote and inaccessible. And also when you're at home, it's a way of feeling connected as well. A lot of our volunteers, a lot of our communities are feeling quite isolated at the moment and vulnerable. And the idea of social prescribing, using digital technology to social subscribe in terms of creating apps that encourage people to go outside, encourage them to get involved. I think there's lots of avenues for digital technology, and certainly within the museum space, it's about having more than one safe choice. So the idea of not just having digital technology, it's not safe, we can't put a headset on anymore, but it's actually about giving people different choices. And maybe it's about digital technology actually coming up to speed and actually saying we need this to be developed. We need different ways of interacting within our museum. And so this may be the time that we're going to see a lot of creativity.
I just wanted to add to that and to say that the process is just as important as the final product, and actually really thinking about that methodology. And as you said, there isn't a magic bullet that will hit all your audiences. And for us as well, facilitating engagement initially is really important, putting a lot of effort and resources towards enabling people to be able to first access what it is that you're producing at the end as well. It's important.
I think it's potentially quite difficult for smaller museums to do this first step, to not only maybe use social media to talk about the program that one has, or to place some objects there, but to actually become a little bit more confident in saying, okay, we can do more. What would be useful for them to help this, or what are the gaps in development in that regard?
I mean, I think size can be difficult, perhaps if it means a lack of resources, but I often find if you're smaller, you're more fleet of foot and you can actually pivot more, and actually there is more flexibility. whereas sometimes some very large institutions move very slowly and it's quite difficult to get things through. And so I think realizing that you can experiment a lot more than a larger institution, and actually thinking that you can collaborate, you can work more flexibly actually when you're smaller. And well, I mean, I think it's a lot of yeah, so that's something that I would say. And so repeat the second part of your question. You said starting out and
starting out, but also to become more confident. I think you're touching something, saying that it's often a lack of resource, or that collaboration enables this.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's just I think it's just trying really, and realizing that it's an iterative process, and collaborating with artists, perhaps reaching out to other institutions and trying to learn from perhaps what works with them. But I think you just have to have an idea of, if you do enough, maybe piloting and actually seeing what works and then building from there. I think if it's not an informed choice, then perhaps there might more issues than perhaps you could avoid. But that's what I would say.
Abira, you mentioned something in your talk that really sparked my interest. You said that small community archives, digital community archives, are seen as being endangered.
Yes, yeah.
And I wondered what exactly the issue is and what you mean by that, whether it's an issue of maintenance, for example, that something is on a server and there's no finance to be maintained and therefore the content just vanishes. Is that?
But yeah, that's also, so there's a Digital Preservation Coalition, which I think institutions sign up to, which is about thinking about digital preservation and ways for mainly institutions to think about how they maintain their content, thinking about obsolescence and how to, but actually this is often focused around very large institutions that do have the resources. So it's initially resources and the finances to host servers, have an understanding about protocols around digital preservation and holding it in, the best practice around holding it in 3 different spaces, which many don't have the ability to do that. And also it's the knowledge and the awareness of how to maintain their digital assets. So often, as you find, you'll have a website that you might yourself kind of upload information and data, and then it disappears after a few years. And so that's something that I noticed. And so they have these categories and they refer to community archives, which I'll share the link to, as critically endangered. And so if you're a community, organization, if you're an artist that has a collection or that has put things online, and that's then what do you do next then? And so some community organizations partner with universities, but for me it was thinking, well, what methods can we use that isn't proprietary and that's open source, and where also there's a community as well where that software is being maintained. And so the Universal Viewer is an open source platform which has a community of developers, and they use an interesting platform method called so they have a steering group, and then what they have is institutions that then put money in every single month to support any bug fixes, any issues, and that's what keeps it sustainable. And so it was, well, perhaps as a way of us working cooperatively, where we're investing in developers and technology and being able to maintain that. That model doesn't necessarily exist with community archives as such, and there isn't the spaces where you can have that the authority to be able to maintain your own collection. So that's something that I was interested in. So the Nomad website is a static site, and there's also something called Glam 3D, which talks a bit about, which I'll share, which speaks about, I think the static site is called Jekyll. I'm not a developer, so, but I work with a developer who was working on that. So that's something that was interesting for me, actually. And the Nomad project was, I guess, the only example of a community organization using a huge platform like the UV, which is mainly at the moment used by the British Library, I think Stanford Library, and other institutions like that. But,
yeah, thank you. I wonder how the others deal with these issues of keeping content alive. We also have Judith McCarthy with us Stefano from Donegal County Museum. She's also one of our CINE partners and is the curator of the museum. So I want to come into this too, but I can also see that Sue, for example, has been talking about the exhibitions and saying that 2 are currently online and 2 others not.
Yeah, that was my next point as well. We had to shut them off because they weren't sustainable, because 4 years ago the technology was so different, and then today you can't experience the content as you were. You have to keep it up, and that's a workload, that's a budget issue as well. And is it quite relevant? I mean, do we really need to put it online? Those questions, came across a lot around the 4 years, and what we decided on is that every 2 years we would, at the end of the second year, we would shut down the content. And that's the problem, I think, with the digital. You put something on and it can stay there for like years and years. And if it's a simple thing, it would be accessible 20 years later, but would it really mean something? And do you really need to use this space to tell a message that is not relevant the next day? So that's what we try to understand. And I think that it's really one of the first things that you should think, is this a one-off thing? So it's a one time you visit the exhibition, okay, that's okay as well. Or you want people to come back, and would you sustain the space and, add new content every day? What do you want to do? That's also one of the things that should, for us, it was a one-off exhibition. Obviously, people can come back and read more in details, can spend more time, can spend 15 seconds, can spend 2 hours. That's their own prerogative. But what we are proposing for us, it's a one-off exhibition experience. But for a museum, what would be the interest? For a small space, what would be the interest? Bring people down to the museum? Or since there's COVID and now there's a new world order, entertain those people online as well, or do both, or do only one, shut down? So those questions, I think we all start thinking more around those things. I mean, this webinar would stay online forever unless you delete it, but would it really mean something the next year? Or you use a space on the digital, so it means also today it's environmental friendly because we haven't traveled, but when those pile up in a huge amount of factories where they tore down trees. So do you really need this space to sustain? I mean, those are all questions that, cross my mind when I think about digital outputs of things. Do we really need to use this space?
I'd just like to say as well that I suppose at Timespan we've been collaborating on digital innovation projects for about 8 years now, and so definitely you do see that the nature of it, that technology moves on, and something that you had maybe 7 or 8 years ago is just not fit for purpose anymore and is a bit old. But I think the other thing is that I think the museums, we see digital technology or immersive technology or scanning objects, that type of thing, we see it as an interpretive tool. So we don't see it as using it like one-off and then not coming back to it for years. We don't see it as something that replaces the tangible object. So it becomes part of our everyday museum toolkit that we use to interpret our histories, our objects, our collections, and also to communicate important messages and issues that are happening in the earth, in the planet today. And so we really think that digital technology is an important part of that interpretive toolkit. But we've got to think very carefully, why are you using it? Do you need to use it, and where it's relevant? And therefore it will become a better tool in the process. And I think we've also got to think about, I think for a lot of museums and smaller museums, it would be really good to have access to best practice documentation and guidance on this. And it's important, and we've been doing this through the CINE project, is referencing our work so that others can actually see the breakdown of the process of how we've used it. And that was going to be very useful for other people to use as well. So I think that it's as much about the practice of digitization itself and about you know, how it can be used as a tool.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. Any more comments on this? Maybe my next question is about people, about our target audiences. So we've touched on this, but how can digital technologies help us to take the museum out of the building? And how can digital technologies help us to bring people into the museum? Obviously, at the moment, a lot of museums are closed, but we can hope that there is a post-COVID time where we can open the doors again, and then hopefully technology has also moved on. And I'm not talking just about social media and ways of marketing. I'm talking about maybe more creative ways, if you have any ideas.
As part of the our last part within the CINE project was creating a social prescribing app, and in fact it's part of a collection of apps that we're producing. And the idea of these, at the moment we have a community that is vulnerable and quite anxious about venturing outdoors. So we have been using digital technology to develop apps based on trails around where we live. And it could be about geology or archaeology or clearances and colonialism. We're incorporating into these app trails, whether it be immersive technology, whether it be immersive looks at the landscape around you, whether it is 360-degree photos or film of places that may be remote and that you may not be able to get to. So we think that this type of tool actually says to people, this is for you. This is for you to access landscapes, to go outdoors. And also, if you are part of society that can't venture out at the moment, then this is bringing that experience to you. And we think that the digital tool as a social prescribing tool actually fits into this criteria of engaging with groups really well.
That is a really nice example of a very fast response to the current situation, where a bit of creativity and innovation actually can do a lot.
Can I as well? For us, for the example of Museum Without Walls, what we wanted to do, as I mentioned, is to, you know, Istanbul is the cultural capital of Turkey. So nothing really happened 5 years ago. Nothing really was happening around in other cities, in smaller cities. Now we have more, initiatives blooming and museums blooming in other cities. But we wanted to create an offer for people who don't have access to exhibitions because of geographical issues. That was one of the things. The second thing was people who don't have access to museums because of their disabilities, because the cities are not accessible, even though the places are. The third one was to break this wall, this intimidating art wall between a person that has never been to an exhibition, that thinks that it's eye hard, that they won't understand things, and it's not for them. It's not because they don't like it. That's a choice. I would understand that, but it's because it's not for them and they won't understand it. They are not sufficient enough. So that was our three things to, introduce. That's why we developed Museum Without Walls, and we didn't expect people to only take this experience online and not ever go, or maybe try another online exhibition around in the digital, but our aim was to experience this, understand that there is a possibility for you. You can't go out, you can find a way to experience art, and you can like it as well, and go to museums. It wasn't like just stay on the digital and that's the only option for you, but we wanted to use it as an introductory space for people to enjoy museums, and as a good example for institution on how to be accessible to others. I mean, I understand that a person living in Anatolia won't be able to fly into Istanbul to experience an exhibition, but a person living next door to the museum that can't literally go into museum because it's not wheelchair accessible, that's also a stand. We wanted to set this standard using the digital, and we did launch events in museums, and we brought people that taught around arts and disability and how to make spaces accessible. So it wasn't only an online showcasing space per se, it was also a learning point for us, but for the communities and for the institutions as well. That's how we used it, at least.
Well, thanks for that.
Sorry, Anna, I'll just add a bit there as well. I mean, those of you in the partnership will know that two of the projects that we worked on, or two of the case studies that we looked at in the CINE project, were working with communities here in Donegal. So what we did was, working with two different communities, we enabled them using digital technology to share their stories and their history. Stories and objects and artifacts and images that probably would never have seen the light of day if we hadn't worked with them in order to bring them out of the boxes under the bed and out of the attic, and to share that with the world, basically using digital technology, using websites, using 3D photogrammetry, but at a very, very simple level, because we were working with communities, and in a lot of cases older people who didn't have a lot of knowledge around digital technology. So it's at a very, very basic level. But we've created then on the cinecommunities.org all of these digital tools that hopefully other communities will be able to use in order to do similar work that we have done. So that's how we would have gone out. But also there are opportunities with digital technology too. I mean, if you think about what a museum is, as Sue was saying, it's basically a building or a white box that contains all of these stories and artifacts that are of the community, yet they're in one place. And here in Donegal, we could be maybe 2 hours from the community whose story we are trying to tell. So the digital technology will enable us to reconnect those objects with their communities and vice versa. So that's how I would see it working. And there are all sorts of ways in which that can happen, and hopefully, and that will change and grow over time, because digital technology is constantly changing, but that's what I would see it enabling us to do.
Thank you. We're coming back to this issue of accessibility now, and it's a really fascinating one, because the digital seems to free us from time and space and place, and I wonder if there is a wish from you as practitioners in a museum context mainly, for the technology developers of the future. What is it that they could help you with in your work? I mean, personally, for me, it would at the moment be to have a real partner meeting and conference that is maybe through a screen, but a lot more immersive and engaged, to not replace, but to get another and a new sense of the meeting and the cooperation between countries and partners in these EU projects, for example. Any other wishes?
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay, well, I'll talk. Oh, the video's off then. I was going to say that the thing that I would actually wish for developers is to, and I will always go back to the community, because I often feel like when technology is developed, it's often for an audience that necessarily isn't community or diaspora individuals. And so I would like a bit more for communities to be involved in the process of developing, because often what we experience is the final product, but actually how the technology is developed, what platforms are used, the actual kind of nuts and bolts of it isn't something that tends to happen without us being present. So that's something that I would, in how the technology is being developed, how it's being utilized, how it's being, the direction of where the technology is going, is for us to be involved in those conversations, and not for it to be kind of top down. So to have that process to be more democratized, and often that's because of fundraise or resources, and institutions can often decide how a database works, what it looks like, and we just have the kind of online interface that we interact with, but the behind the scenes is not part of, and that's not often questioned when we think about colonialism and knowledge, that actually realizing these frameworks or these structures are also as a problem, as well as the lack of interpretation and the lack of engagement, because a lot of museums here now are struggling in a sense, because they've moved from having, particularly here in the UK, having like almost 70 to 80% of their audiences being tourists, but now are not really engaging with their local community, and being quite relaxed about that. And now they're kind of forced to think about, well, now that we don't have travel, how do we then engage with the people within our locality? So yeah. So.
I do believe that technology would support us in being more accessible and more easy as well. I mean, that's where technology goes, and that's where, I mean, Google goes, and the standards are there, but people are starting to use them. For example, Zoom is more accessible than Teams because it allows caption. You can also add sign language translator and a simultaneous translator easily, for example. So those technologies are developing and are being more easy to use by anyone, anywhere. But it's also the mindset in the content that we're presenting. I mean, that's also, I think, a bit of what touched upon. I mean, you should start with the accessibility, the inclusive mindset. You can't, this is not an add-on. The technology will support you if you want it to support you. If you don't add captions, or if, for example, today I'm speaking quite quickly, rapidly, and I know that people that the first language is not English, or that are not really, you know, that can't hear very well, won't understand what I say because I'm speaking quickly. We have to change our mindset to be more accessible, to understand that our standards are not everybody's standards. And that's in our private life as well as the arts, because, or museums, because as institutions, we have more power over, power in a good sense, power over communities, to change the communities, to educate them, to learn from communities. So we have to find this language, and it comes from the mindset of being inclusive and listening and being able to respond in the same pace or same set of mind, I would say.
Thank you, Sue, for this advice. I would like to wrap up our session here. But if there is any very last minute comments or things you would like to say, here's a last chance. Okay, then I would like to thank Abira and Sue and Jackie, and also Judith to come on, for the engaging presentations and the good discussion. It's been a real pleasure to hosting you today. I would like to very briefly say what the next CINE talk is. We are talking about the future possibilities, and this will be streamed a little bit later in the day at 5 o'clock Central European time, because it's part of the Noland seminar, a regional museum seminar in Northern Norway. And the speakers include Katrin Glinka from Germany, talking about imagining the future, one project at a time. Agnieszka Babu from the UK, talking about machine learning in the heritage sector. And also Marinos Ioannidis, the UNESCO Chair of Digital Heritage from Cyprus, who will be doing a closing speech on the topic, because it's our last of the CINE talks. So it would be great if you, and also our audience on Facebook, who I'm thanking as well, could join us again next week at 5 o'clock Central European time. So thank you very much to everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.